Welcome to Emerging with Jamal Robinson, a podcast where you hear from the diverse voices behind emerging technologies and gain useful insights for positive changes in your life and career. On today's show, I speak with Will Collins. What are 1 to 3 words that define you the best?
Curious, thoughtful, empathetic.
What is the last meal you'd want?
Gumbo.
If you could meet anyone throughout history, dead or alive, who would it be?
Muhammad Ali.
What's your favorite TV show, movie, or actor?
Denzel Washington.
What is your most unusual skill or talent?
I can pick things up with my toes.
I don't know if I want to know that. What's your favorite book or author?
I'd say Huck Finn. I think it's the first book, long novel I ever read cover to cover when I was a kid. I was probably second or third grade.
Favorite music artist, song, or album?
That's tough. I'm going to give 2 albums. Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, Kanye, and Good Kid, Mad City, Kendrick.
Love it. What are you most proud of?
My family.
And who do you admire the most and why?
My mom, because she taught me all the important values I use to, live life today.
Will is the Senior Director and GM of Business Development at Databricks. He covers strategic cloud partnerships and previously has led business development at Amazon Web Services, managing a global team and product portfolio of 20+ AI services. Will has also led a business development org at Cisco, covering emerging mobile technologies like 5G. Will is a son, husband, father, brother, and friend, all roles he's used to develop himself into a more empathetic leader and a man of integrity. You're going to enjoy the conversation with Will today. Let's get on with the show. Welcome to the show, Will. Introduce yourself to the guests. Give your full name and your full title.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Will Collins. I am the Senior Director of Business Development at Databricks.
Very cool. Tech has this crazy trend of all these names that don't really directly correlate to what the heck the company does. So can you just help me understand, what does Databricks even mean?
Yeah, so Databricks is a company focused on data and AI. If you think about all of the things you have to do with your data from the time you create it to the time you turn it into useful insights, whether it be to understand what happened in the past or use the data to make predictions about what could happen in the future, i.e. AI and machine learning. Databricks is a platform that powers that entire life cycle.
And your CEO and founder, how often do you interact with them or in your role?
So I'm brand new. I'm just a month or 2 in, so I haven't actually interacted with them a whole lot yet. But I would say probably, a couple times a quarter. We have different business reviews on the part of the business I lead and, exchange ideas about how do we grow that part, resolve issues, things like that.
So I actually asked that because I have somewhat of a man crush on Matei.
Oh, word.
Yeah, my first introduction to him was back when I was working in big data, and I think he had came to maybe his Hortonworks conference or some conference, but he was speaking about Spark, and at the time it was this new amazing technology, and the guy seemed like a genius. And then also ran into him later at a VMware event when they invited us out to speak, and he probably doesn't know this, but I took a little selfie while he was talking. And then I saw him in the streets once in San Francisco, and that was the first time I noticed how tall he was. And I was rather than recruit him for my tech team, I probably should have him on my basketball team. But I was just curious if you had interacted with him or even played ball with him, but I'm going to assume no.
No, but everyone in the company has obviously tremendous amount of respect for him as one of the founders. But I've heard our CEO, who he himself is brilliant as a technologist, refer to Matei in kind of this other category, right, as a brilliant mind. So a ton of respect for Matei.
Yeah, not at all surprised. If you can get an autograph and slide it my way, that'll be pretty dope.
Try to make an intro one of these days.
Cool. So you said that your role is business development. Mm-hmm. Can you describe what that means at Databricks?
Yeah, so business development means, different things at different companies. But in my role, specifically, I think about how do we more programmatically align with our partner, in this case, AWS, Amazon Web Services, to create, nonlinear growth for the business between Databricks and AWS. And so the reason I highlight that term nonlinear is, sales is a growth engine within any company. Marketing is a growth engine within any company, right? Even the product itself, when you think about product-led growth, could be a growth engine for a company. The type of business development that I focus on is how do you think about strategies, programs, relationships you could put in place that create that kind of exponential or near exponential growth in a very short period of time. So yeah, that's kind of the type of business development I do.
And I know you've worked across various companies, but not making it specific to Databricks or even AWS, but thinking about alliances, like are there various principles that you hold when you think about like how to partner? For example, like it could be a win-win paradigm or it could be other things that you may use to make sure your partnerships are successful on both sides.
I think at the core of any partnership at any level is there has to be shared goals between both parties or multiple parties that are meaningful and impactful to the bottom line for all parties involved. If you don't have shared goals, it doesn't define kind of like what success looks like for that partnership. What's the North Star? What are you guys trying to achieve? That's not shared between the two of you. And if they're not material for all parties involved, if it really matters to one party but is not that big of a deal to the other, the parties won't put the required investment, time, and focus in place to make it successful and achieve those shared goals. So I would say those two things have been, regardless of, and I've done tons of partnerships over the years, but regardless of whatever the alliance or the partnership is, those two things always have to be true for them to work.
Makes a lot of sense. And this podcast is aimed at primarily educating people who would like to be the Will Collins or people that are looking to pivot their career. So how do you gain partnership experience, or how did you first get into partnerships?
For me, it was a natural evolution from sales. So right out of college, I got into this very competitive sales associates program at the first company I worked at, which was Cisco Systems. It's now Cisco. And after a year, they spit you out being ready to be, a major account manager out in the field. And so I was an account manager on global accounts, got experience working with big customers. And the thing about big customers, companies that spend $1 billion or more with Cisco, right? Those were the types of customers that I had. It's a partnership, right? Like you're selling to them, but it's really consultative in nature. And it's really about you understanding their business and not just being able to, match their need to whatever it is you sell. It's also a lot about joint innovation and taking their requirements back to your engineering organization and figuring out how you guys can make each other better. And so I was always drawn to that aspect of the sales relationship. And then after doing it for 6 or 7 years, and then also, towards the end of that, getting my MBA, I just decided this is what I want to do full time. I want to think, about kind of the more strategic side of how two companies or multiple companies work together to create value. And so that kind of took me from sales naturally into the world of partnerships and business development.
I've also had a similar trajectory in the sense of working with strategic accounts. It's very in-depth. You know them more than you probably want to. And at that point, it does become a partnership. Typically align executives and you align incentives. And to your point earlier, that's what makes the partnership successful. Have you noticed a difference? So you mentioned working at Cisco and of course now you're at Databricks and then you had a stint at AWS. Have you noticed a difference in the way that enterprises choose to partner, or is it pretty much you go to each company and you can execute your partnership principles, or are there small nuances?
There are things that are transferable for sure, but it's also highly dependent on the company, their maturity in terms of their go-to-market strategy, the extent to which the ecosystem is important to adopting that company's technology. So all those things play a role in the different types of partnership and business development roles that I've had over the years. So companies, for example, like Cisco, when I came to Cisco was, had been around for 20 plus years and at one point was the most valuable company in the world and was just very mature in terms of its sales and go-to-market strategy. And also the extent to which it relied on partners to run its business. Cisco was and still today is a very partner-centric company. And then I went to AWS, and AWS, obviously, huge partner network, leading business development. At AWS, we relied on partners a lot. But at the same time, AWS was a younger company, even though, bigger in revenue and probably the same in employees, still younger in terms of just being a company within Amazon and its go-to-market strategy. So while AWS had a big successful partner business, it wasn't kind of as core to how they ran the company as a Cisco had been doing it exactly that way for 20 plus years. And then Databricks was built on the public clouds, right? So you have to consume Databricks on, or the vast majority of our customers consume Databricks on any one of the three public clouds, Google, Microsoft, AWS. And so partnerships are core to the business there, right? You can't run the business without thinking about how do we make our customers' experience using Databricks as easy and as good as possible, on each of the three clouds.
Actually, to that point, there was a question I want to bring up. Your executive or CEO and a few other people recently authored a paper called Sky Above the Clouds, which was about evolving cloud business. And obviously, you've worked at these hyperscalers, which we're calling AWS, Microsoft, and Google, large cloud platforms. But then you've also worked at companies that either integrate with those clouds. So Cisco has like various networking solutions on top of the cloud, and then also now Databricks. What's been your experience like working on the hyperscaler and then also working on top of the hyperscaler? And then would you say that even in the same role, like that requires different skill sets, or is it pretty much the same as they're all software and all in the cloud?
So I would say from the perspective of the hyperscaler, i.e. AWS, Microsoft, Google, largely you want to be a platform on which your customers and partners can build their applications, whether it be customers building applications that they consume on their own or partners who build applications that they serve to many customers. You want to be the best platform for all of that to happen. And so it's important for the hyperscalers, companies like AWS and their peers, to offer the tools and then, not just the technology tools, but the programs, the partnership frameworks that allow and attract people to want to build those applications on the platform. And then I think from the perspective of a Databricks or a Cisco, you have a customer base that you want to be able to serve anywhere, that you maximize the value of your company by having the broadest addressable market that you can work with. And so you don't want to necessarily be constrained to just one platform, because that cuts off whole segments of the market that you could work with and serve your product to. And so it's really important for companies like Cisco and Databricks to be across all of the clouds and be able to offer a consistent set of capabilities that allow customers who might be consuming one or more of the clouds to be able to seamlessly be productive and use your technology in a very consistent, seamless way, regardless of where they're using it.
That's a really great explanation. So if you were coaching or mentoring someone and they were looking at those two options of working at a company that exists on top of these hyperscalers and working at a company that was a hyperscaler, if they had specific interest in a domain, would you recommend going into the company on top of the hyperscaler, which may be able to focus more deeply on a specific industry vertical? Or do you think that they could still go to the hyperscaler and get the same results?
I think you could. So I've done both, and I've enjoyed both. So I'm biased. I think you could do both. I wouldn't push anyone one way or the other. It's always about what are you fascinated by? Like what problem is the most exciting problem you feel like you could solve or be a part of right now? And then, where are you going to be developed, rewarded, good work-life balance? Like, if I'm giving anyone career advice, those would be the type of tenets or principles I'd use. And then I think you can find that, depending on the answers to those questions, at a hyperscaler or an ISV.
Makes a lot of sense.
It's kind of a cop-out, but I think it could be both.
I think what you're saying is relevant, though. It's to some degree, it's what you make out of your career. And it's not to say that every company has exactly the same opportunities, but opportunities do exist wherever you're at. So I appreciate that answer. So your title has business development and alliances in it, and we kind of talked about the alliances piece. Now I want to transition to like the business development piece, specifically because I've interviewed another business development person and they've given their answer, but then also all you biz dev guys like Good Kid, Mad City. So I want to see if your answers here are going to be the same too. So with that said, how do you compare and contrast business development across the companies you've worked at? Is it exactly the same? And in this situation, like I know you, so I know like the work that you did at AWS, some of your business development role was like pre a product being generally available. And I knew that required a certain level of work. And then after a product becomes generally available, that requires different sets of work. So can you maybe just explain that at a high level and kind of compare and contrast for those that are interested in business development or looking to pivot their career there?
I think about business development as a spectrum, where on one end of the spectrum, it's very sales oriented, near-term revenue oriented activity and focus. And then on the other end of the spectrum, it's more market development, product development, innovation, bringing new things to market or creating new partnerships, new, ways of doing business. And what I find is that some roles sit, very far on one end of the spectrum or the other, or some roles are very broad and require you to do all of the above, right? You have to kind of seamlessly float from one end of the spectrum back to the other, depending on what the needs of the business are. And so I've been fortunate enough to have roles all across that spectrum, and also roles that kind of go back and forth, like I talked about all the time. At Databricks, for example, what that means is I'm thinking about how do we, as I said, go back to that term nonlinear. How do we create nonlinear growth through our relationship with AWS? And that could include things like product integration, where when a Databricks service is used or an AWS service is used, it drives the adoption of the other. There's downstream pull on each other. It could be thinking about where we have overlapping focus on existing customer segments, and we see common problems that we could help customers solve together and create value for customers. How do we put those things, those motions, let's call them, together in a way where it's easy to do them at scale in a consistent way, in a way that you can measure and grow to accelerate both parties' business? I spend a lot of time thinking about and implementing programs to do that. So Databricks, that's what that role means. I've had other roles where it was much more, I'm aligned to a sales organization. I specialize in a particular technology or type of deal structuring. And, I'm working the top deals in the pipeline to help the sales teams more effectively do their jobs and generate in-quarter, in-year revenue. So it's a wide spectrum in terms of the types of things you're doing, but also the timeline that you're working on. I've had roles where I'm thinking about what's going to happen, 18 to 36 months out. And then I've had roles where I'm thinking about what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 months.
Thanks for that thorough analysis. One of the things that I picked up, you had mentioned taking roles that give you as much exposure as possible. I'm assuming that that's something that you would mentor other people to do. Look for the business development roles that will give them as much experience across as many areas as possible, especially younger in their career. So then that way they can determine what it is they want. And then maybe later in their career, focus more deeply on the areas that they find most impactful. Is that a correct analysis?
I think so. That's the way I've done it. And that's probably a function of me just naturally being very curious. My track record, it's not, my intention is not to be this way, but it just has always kind of worked out that way. Throughout my career, I've always, every 3 to 4 years, taken a different role, something different. Like I get to the point where I have to learn something new. And, I'm almost 20 years into my career now. So I've done that 3, 4, 5, 6 times now. But I would definitely recommend seeing a lot, to your point, so that not only what you're really interested in, you might lean into that in the second half of your career, but also you see the dots to connect. Even though I've done 4 or 5 pretty different things from a technology perspective throughout my career, what benefits me is that I'm able to pull those things through. They're not always directly related to each other, but I'm always shocked at how I find out. 10 years ago, I was working on streaming media and content delivery networks when we were moving to over-the-top content and networking. Then after that, I started working on 5G. Then after that, I started working on AI and IoT. And so across those things, I'm always surprised how much connectivity and connective tissue there is between those. So it's another reason to do a lot of things, is it just makes you smarter in a more general sense, and that serves you well later in your career.
And I actually want to touch on that base. When I met you, you were doing some of the most important work, which is incubation of brand new products, which represented the future of AWS and AI. But to your point, previously you're working on 5G and over the top and so forth. So how do you, not from a technical sense, enable yourself, but maybe even emotionally? Because there's some people that jumping from one thing to another thing, specifically that other thing being AI, which is a nascent technology, they'd be very intimidated and they'd wait. But then obviously waiting, we know with emerging technology, you miss out on the most significant opportunities. So how do you coach yourself, or what do you do mentally to get in that space where you can easily make that jump to a brand new career, a brand new company?
For me, again, it's about being curious. I like to think about the impact that technology has on the world. I like to zoom out a lot and think about how does this technology impact the way that we're going to live and interact with each other and work. And so I'm always I feel like chasing, what's that thing that's going to be the most impactful new technology to the way that we live and work play in the future. And so that I think that's why I've been led to some of the things I've had a chance to work on, right? Streaming media changed the way that we watched. I'm old enough to remember, I'm going to sound like an old person now. I'm old enough to remember when you had to, like appointment television. My favorite show when I was growing up was The Simpsons. Every Sunday night at 8 o'clock, I knew The Simpsons was going to be on. I would break my neck when I was a kid to make sure I was home at Sunday night by 8 o'clock so I could watch The Simpsons. My son's not going to know that world. That will make no sense to him. But that was a really cool underlying set of technologies that enabled that I got to work on 10, 15 years ago that enabled that reality to exist today, where my son doesn't understand there's a world where you can't just stream whatever you want at any time. So, I could relate that to 5G. I could relate that to AI and IoT, the stuff that I'm doing now. But that's always what's drove me to want to look for the next thing.
Very dope. I can also relate to The Simpsons. My sister put me on. So probably up until season 28, which I want to say I have at least the first 31 seasons. But till season 28, my sister and I would sit down and watch it. And probably before the credit comes off the screen, we can already tell you like what episode it is. And we know the like B plot and the A plot and so forth. So definitely diehard Simpsons. But going back to business development. So you've kind of given emotionally, it sounds like you just chose to be curious. And then as you were talking also, I was reminded of a book that I read that talked about courage for those that may be intimidated. Courage was not the absence of fear, how it's typically presented, but it's just the realization that something else is more important. And it sounds like you probably had some fears with potentially making the jump, but for you it's more important to be curious and learn these new things, which allowed you to move forward. If I can ask maybe one more question about alliances, because you and I are talking and we're in this unique situation where I currently work at Microsoft. You are working at Databricks. Databricks has the Azure Databricks solution on top of the Microsoft cloud. But as you mentioned, like you're working with AWS. Mm-hmm. As an alliance manager, how do you operate in that environment where you're focused on one partner, but then obviously there's a focus on another partner with Databricks, but then the two partners that you all are focusing on maybe are in competition with each other? Like, how does that work? And then how would you, coach somebody that's like looking at a job and looking at these complex triangles?
I think what every party involved has to do first is think about what's in the best interest of the customer. In business, at least, it's hard to be wrong if you're thinking about what's in the best interest of the customer. And so, for example, if the customer says, I want to be able to use Databricks on any cloud, and if the customer says, I don't want an experience where this feature and capability that I really love is available on this cloud, but it's not available on this cloud. If you listen to your customers and work backwards from that to decide how you should arrange your product and your business, it's generally a good mental model. And I think that guides a lot of our strategy as a company, and in my role, how I think about, even though I'm focused on AWS, what that means in the context of the way that we think about our partnerships with all three clouds. I think that's a really important kind of guiding tenet. And then I think just on a personal level, trust and confidentiality is important. There's always going to be things that you innovate on with one partner, or there's always going to be things that you do, to grow the business for the part of the business you're focused on. I think it's just important for the partner ecosystem you work with to understand, how much your company values principles of trust and confidentiality, and how that relates to the partnership you're building.
A great answer. Always focus on the customer. And then maybe a quick follow-up. So thinking about the person that's looking at the Databricks or the Microsoft or the AWS or Google or any other partner that may be in that triangle, how would you as an individual, like looking at your career and how you wanted to progress, like how would you determine which angle you'd be at? Let's just assume that a customer is consuming Databricks across multiple clouds. You could be at either of those cloud platforms that are hosting the Databricks solution that obviously have other solutions that could complement it. Or you could be at Databricks and like be focused more on the technology. Like, how do you differentiate like where you'd want to play in that space?
I'll just do it from a very personal lens. For me, Databricks is where I want to be right now because, going back to the idea of looking at different technologies across my career, I don't think I've ever been more passionate about a specific technology domain and its impact on the world. And one that I think is going to be the most impactful of all the things I've worked on, all the things that I could work on. As I feel about data and AI. So to be at a company who just like wakes up and goes to bed every day thinking about data and AI and how to make that easier and more transformative for our customers, for me, that level of focus and everyone in the company thinking about that was really attractive. And so whatever the problem space that you're passionate about is, you might consider working at a place that specializes only in that. And you might see that as a benefit. So that's one. And then two, I've always been, up until now, a big company, publicly traded, name brand. I worked at Cisco for almost 13 years, and then followed that by going to AWS, which is obviously part of Amazon, right? So two big household name companies. And I think I benefited from that a lot, through the first 15 plus years of my career. But I very consciously decided that I wanted to go to a pre-IPO startup, that obviously, Databricks has had a tremendous amount of success, one of the most successful software startups in history. So still obviously very, very mature and very successful, but still an opportunity to build and develop a lot of what that company is going to be, and participate in that growth. And so that was really important for me in thinking about the opportunity I wanted to pursue. So it was one, the technology, the level of focus, and two, just where the company is in its maturity right now and what I'm really fascinated by.
Excellent answer. Even in my own career, that contrast of big company, has a lot of money, well-funded, able to do whatever, has a well-established brand versus a startup I worked at, which my startup was nowhere near the size of yours. But at the same time, at one job, I come in, I have like administrative assistants and people helping out and doing stuff. At that startup, I literally swept the floors, washed the dishes, clean things in addition to doing site reliability. That level of contrast allowed me to better appreciate things in life, and it sounds like the contrast has helped you too.
Yep.
One quick follow-up question about AI. I'd love to dive deep into generative models, stable diffusion, and stuff like that, but it probably is a little bit more advanced than what our audience cares for. But at a general level, thinking about AI, it is still an emerging technology. At the time you got in it, it was even more emergent. How do you get up to speed and learn? So let's say somebody's gotten past that hurdle. They're intimidated, but they took the job. The company took an opportunity on them, and now they're in the space, and now they're freaking out, and they're like, holy crap, how do I keep up with all these things? There's new companies every day. There's new technology. Just maybe walk me through how you stay relevant.
So this is going to be a shameless plug, and I'm not getting paid for this, but I'm a YouTube addict when I'm trying to learn something.
I love it.
When I'm trying to learn something, I'll spend days, few hours a day, depending on how much I have to do, just absorbing content. And it's probably an inefficient way to get smart on something, but it works for me over the years. I've done it forever. So I start there, right? Just trying to consuming thought leadership in the space. You very quickly figure out who the thought leaders are, what types of things they're thinking about. And then you work backwards from that for me to think about, okay, what businesses are involved in this, either consuming it or producing it. And when I get to that level, I start to get to, more of the industry blogs, the press that covers, so for years, things like TechCrunch have been like an easy place to start as an outlet to go get smart on certain companies, especially since they cover companies of all stages of maturity. You can go on there and find out about who just got the latest funding round and why the investors like them. You can go on there and find out about some big announcement that a big, blue chip technology company made at their customer conference and what impact that has on the industry. So I kind of do that kind of stuff, but all of it just, being curious and trying to figure out what are the things that are at the forefront of this industry right now. And that's where the thought leadership piece is. And then working backwards from that and thinking about, okay, well, where is the industry today? What companies are playing an important role in that ecosystem? And then from there, I can start to narrow in on who are the companies I'm interested in? What are the parts of this technology domain that I'm specifically interested in, and go from there.
I do the exact same thing. I'm on YouTube all the time. I not so much now, but back in the day, I used to have all the hyperscalers bookmark their YouTube channels. Yep. And essentially just looking at what they're producing. You can look behind the scenes. So the marketing, I would say, is very important. When you look at these companies, who they choose to bring out, most hyperscalers have relationships with most of the Fortune 500 and Global 2000 enterprises, but who are they choosing to bring out? What are they saying of all the things within AI or whatever the domain is? What are they choosing to highlight? These are things that you can kind of reverse engineer in your head and say, okay, this is really important. This is how they're setting the market. And then another thing that I love about what you said about going after thought leaders, on average, most industries, you're going to have a few people that are going to essentially move the market. For example, when we look at mobile, if Apple were to announce some new feature on an iPhone, for the most part, they move the market in that direction, even if that feature existed beforehand. So as people are looking to get up to speed, it sounds like they can take a similar approach, focus on the thought leaders, not to say that it gives you everything, and then maybe in some specific cases you don't want to, but for the most part, that's a good general way to start. Appreciate and love that answer. So now, Will, we want to get into Will Collins, a man outside of business. Can you maybe start with your background, things like where you grew up, some of your influences from your childhood?
Yeah, so it's always hard for me to answer, where I grew up or where I'm from, because I'm kind of a hybrid. I'm originally from the Bay Area, born in Mountain View, California, lived all over the Bay Area. When I was going into 7th grade, I moved. My mom got a promotion. My mom worked at Lockheed Martin for basically all of my life. She got a promotion to Lockheed's headquarters, which was in Bethesda, Maryland. So in 7th grade, I moved to Maryland. And so I spent, there through high school in the DC area. So I'm kind of a mix of like a Bay Area dude and a DC dude. So it's hard to answer that. But I come from, and, all my family's still back in California. So, when I think about where home is like I associate with the Bay Area. And I come from a pretty big family, a pretty close family. We're always at each other's houses, and I grew up and am still today a 49ers fan. Every weekend of my life during football season, I would be at 49ers games. So that's kind of where I'm from. I'm a hybrid, I would say.
Okay. Shout out to 49ers, who are currently doing quite well.
That's right.
I actually went to the first game that they got Christian McCaffrey, and he threw, it was against the Chargers in LA, threw for a touchdown, ran for a touchdown, and caught a touchdown, which was amazing. Got me my money's worth. So I'm definitely a 49ers fan now.
We'll take all fans from everywhere. We don't discriminate.
Hey, you probably need them too. 49ers have been down for a little while, but I'm glad to see them back up. But something I also picked up on, your mom working at Lockheed Martin. Like, Lockheed doesn't hire any dummies, and your mom's out there, and they're like moving her out to Maryland, so she must have been pretty significant at the company. So can you maybe explain like her influence on your life?
Yeah. So my mom, she's, I think I said she was the person I admire most, but she raised me and my siblings, for the most part as a single mom, all while, holding down a very important, in many cases, stressful job. My mom worked at Lockheed, and she was also, one of the IT orgs at Lockheed that was focused on their like top secret, government programs.
Let's not disclose that on this podcast. I don't want the feds kicking in my door, but keep going.
All right, we'll just wipe that part out. But anyway, yeah, she worked at Lockheed, had a really stressful job. And, I just saw how obviously smart she was to have been able to accomplish that. But also just how she was able to balance the career she had, but also, I think I have the best mom ever. So she was able to kind of balance that. And that kind of taught me, what it takes to be successful, how to be able to handle different situations in your life with kind of equal poise and grace. So I would say she's obviously was a big part of who I am today.
And even as a man that is like knowing you in this later stage in your life, I can see where you've had strong female influences. Even on LinkedIn, I see where you're constantly giving women credit for things they've accomplished or acknowledging strong women that have influenced you. And then as we work together at AWS, I saw your relationship with Zoe. Shout out to Zoe Hillenmeyer, now CRO. Yeah, everyone loves Zoe. With that said, I'm assuming that's just carried over. You've had this strong female figure in your life at a young age, and then you've latched onto that and looked to even accelerate that, as I've also seen you mentoring people at AWS and other places.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a mama's boy. So it's hard being who I am and seeing what my mom was able to accomplish in her career, but also I'm a man. I'll never be able to fully identify with it, but I can identify with a lot of the issues women experience in the types of environments that we work in, because that's what I heard, being my mom's best friend, that's what I heard growing up. She would come home oftentimes and confide in me about why her day was hard or what was frustrating her about the way she was being treated by her male colleagues, or, double standards she felt like, disadvantaged her. And so I'm just kind of naturally very keenly attuned to that without it being a lot of effort. I just was conditioned that way. And I think that has impacted the way that I think about leadership and mentorship in the workplace.
I appreciate you bringing that into work to create a more empathetic environment for all, but specifically women, is an amazing trait to have as a leader. talking about your family and how influential it is. I know recently you've had an addition to your family, and maybe if you can speak about that and like how that's impacting your career.
My wife and I have a 6-month-old. His name is Xavier, or we call him Zavi. But yeah, I'm a new dad. He's our first child. It's the greatest thing ever.
I love to hear that.
It's the best thing that's ever happened to me and my wife. And so seeing, as I said, how my mom was able to balance a very stressful, demanding career, but also not sacrificing anything in terms of being an amazing mom. That's the standard for me, right? And then also adding to that dimension, being a husband, right? So while I didn't see that dynamic when I was growing up, I know how important it is. And so I'm all about trying to be in the optimal state I can be in all three of those areas, right? At least those three areas, right? Because I'm also a son, I'm a friend, I'm a brother. So that's how I think about it, right? Is just trying to balance all of that and being present when you're in or engaging with any one of those parts of your life.
We're definitely going to speak on the wife a little bit more in a second, but I want to get into like the work-life balance and how you said you want to prioritize your son and your family and even mental health and all these other things. Do you find that at any company you have the opportunity to do that regardless of role, and it's more so about like how you approach that? Or is it sometimes company specific and you may find yourself in a role that is not conducive to good work-life balance and being the father or the husband that you want to be? How do you navigate those things?
First and foremost, it's always going to be on you. And I'd love to live in a world in which, I felt like the company I work for cared as much about my well-being as I do, but that's not realistic. Again, there's a spectrum there in terms of company culture and how proactive they are about that. But it has to start with you. It has to start with you making a conscious decision about what kind of life you want to live, and life being defined by personal, professional, all of the above. And then working backwards from that to figure out, what career opportunities within your current situation or others you're evaluating fit that best. And there have been, parts of my life where, I didn't really care about work-life balance. I was younger. I was trying to grow my career as quickly as possible. I was trying to get as much exposure as possible. And I didn't have as many obligations outside of that. And so at that point in your life, if wherever you are in your life, if that's what your focus is, then be happy with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I lived that life and I was very happy when I was doing it. But I'm also at a stage in life now where I get as much, if not more, personal satisfaction and meaning out of those parts of my life. And so there's no way I would sacrifice, that for a career. And I'm fortunate to be in a position where I don't really have to make those trade-offs as much, right? Like I feel at Databricks, I can grow and accelerate career development as fast as I want to, but I also have a tremendous amount of space to live the life that I want to live outside of Databricks. And so the optimal state for me is finding a place where you don't have to make any trade-offs, or you have to make as few trade-offs as possible.
And I like the way you put it. Don't expect the companies to care more about you and your future and your health and all these other things than you do. You have to take lead on that and then work with the companies to let them know like what it is you will and will not accept. And then at that point, if a company draws a hard line, then you probably have to look for a new role. But in the case of Databricks and other companies, it seems like they're working with your work-life balance. They prioritize you as a human being in addition to you as a technologist.
Yeah, definitely.
I think very highly of you. You're a very intelligent brother. You've influenced me in positive ways, but I will say I think probably more highly of your wife than you. So if you could maybe get into your wife and what she does and just maybe even how y'all met.
People that have met my wife will agree that she is just like a superior quality human being to me in every dimension that you can measure one.
I'll acknowledge that for the listeners that don't get to meet her.
Yeah, I say that jokingly, but it's actually like mostly true. She's very talented. She's very beautiful. She's very kind. She's very thoughtful. I've outkicked my coverage, as the saying goes.
Where'd y'all meet?
We met in college. Actually, I was 17. I was a senior in high school, and I got accepted to the University of Virginia, and that was my first choice. And they have a weekend in the spring for Black students, prospective Black students to come to, where you basically just like get to know the school, hang out, party. And she was suite mates with a bunch of guys that I went to high school with that were hosting me for the weekend. But we didn't start dating until we were in our late 20s. We were friends for 10 years plus, and then we started dating later.
I'm assuming you all had a foundation where like you really understood each other. So when you built that romance, it was on top of a friendship.
Yeah, it was just natural, right? Like, and because we've known each other for so long and we have the same friend group, our lives just were very easy to come together. Not only do we understand each other, it's like, some couples, there are some relationships where like, these are my wife's friends, these are my friends. These people never would have met had we not started dating. And they're friends now, kind of like, as soon as we break up, they're not going to be friends anymore. That wasn't our situation. Our wedding, for example, we had, I'm going to get the number wrong, but let's say 28 groomsmen and bridesmen, and they were mixing on either sides. It was just like, that's our dynamic.
Well, we got to talk about the wedding. I unfortunately didn't get to go. And unfortunately, all our listeners, you didn't get to go either. But if you didn't get to go, what I did learn about it is that Martha Stewart featured it in her magazine, in her TV show or wherever. And actually, I have to say this. The guy that told me about the wedding, he looked me in the eyes. He got emotional. He said it was the best event that he'd ever been to in his life. Not the best wedding, not the best, like just the best event he'd been to in his life. And this guy is damn near 40. So just help me understand, how are you having a wedding that's featured in Martha Stewart and is the best event of someone's life?
I already explained it. It's my wife.
And I'm hoping that somehow you can get divorced and then remarried to the same woman. So then that way I can get invited to the second wedding or however that works out.
When we renew our vows, you will definitely be there.
Much appreciated. And then your wife, what does she do for a living?
She's an artist.
What is her platform or medium?
She is trained as a painter, and she would say at her core she's a painter, but she does mixed media.
And not to say this is true, but I perceive like the left side and right side of the brain where you have the technologist that is very like X's and O's and ones and zeros. And then you have the spectrum of an artist. Has that contrast been beneficial for you?
Oh, for sure. She exposes me to parts of life I would have never otherwise experienced or known about. She thinks about things, very intuitively thinks about things in a way I would never consider, or it would take me forever to come around to that point of view. So yeah, it's enriched my life in ways that I probably can't even measure.
That is a great note to end on. So with that said, what is next for Will Collins, personally and professionally?
I think personally, just really getting into being a dad. He's 6 months old. I'm looking forward to all the other stages of his life that are going to come. Getting to experience that with my wife, continuing our journey together, being there for all the important things for my family and friends, being able to be present. That's all. It's simple stuff like that. That's what I want personally. And then professionally, just continuing to be able to grow and develop as a leader, as a business strategist, expanding the scope of impact that I have at the companies that I work at. Those are the things that, without knowing what the specifics will be important for me next.
You very humbly talked about other thought leaders, but you very much so are a thought leader yourself. And I know a lot of people reach out to you for consultation. And if someone does want to reach out to you to either learn more or understand or have you come out and speak to them, what's the best way to reach out and get in contact with you?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the easiest way to find me. I'm not super active on LinkedIn, but I would say I'm engaged. And I think LinkedIn's, from a professional standpoint, a really important network. I talked about how I learn things. I probably omitted, importantly, LinkedIn. I learn a lot on LinkedIn. There's a lot of thought leadership there. And so, yeah, that's the best way to reach out to me. And yeah, I'm always open to mentorship, consulting, learning about things, speaking at things. So that's the best way to connect with.
Well, I want to especially thank you for your time today because this is a weekend and we're up pretty early in the morning, hence my voice going in and out. So I thank you and you're on vacation too with your family in Florida. I really appreciate you coming out to the podcast to educate our listeners on how to potentially pivot their careers into business development and maybe even Databricks.
Thanks for having me on. I was flattered when you reached out and said you wanted me to do the podcast. I'm really happy that you're doing this. So appreciate you having me on.
All right. Thanks for your time, Will. Have a good rest of the day.
See you.
Peace. That wraps our conversation. Many thanks to Will for sharing his story and the gems of knowledge he's dropped during our discussion. I end each show with a listener-submitted inspirational quote. Today's submission is from Beza Danye at Stanford Medical Health Systems. The quote reads, "Persistence and resilience only come from having been given the chance to work through difficult problems." This quote comes from Gavin Tolley, who is revolutionizing education with specialized schools that focus on engagement-based learning. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcast. And leave a rating and review as it really helps to amplify the message so others can discover this content and benefit from it. And we'd love more user-submitted quotes. I plan to read them at the end of each show. Instructions on how to submit those quotes are in the show notes. That's all for today's show. Thanks for listening, and until next time, peace.